Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the beautiful town of Mount Pleasant. The first thing I want to say is how grateful all of us are to the people of the town of Mount Pleasant for what you have done. You have responded to this very well. It's been hard on all of us. This is unlike anything that any of us have been through before. And we've been through it together. We are still in it together, and we're going to come out of it together. So the purpose of this press conference today is to let everybody know that we had a strategy for protecting the town of Mount Pleasant as we came into this emergency. We're implementing the governor's executive order that was issued yesterday, and we're going to go over how we're going to implement that safely and how it's going to benefit the town without compromising the protections that we have already sacrificed so much to accomplish. And then we're going to go over a little bit about our strategy for coming out, how we're going to do it safely, how we're going to do it in phases, and how we're going to be very cognizant of the fact that we need to restart our economy, that our businesses need help, and that people's, once we're through or on the light side of saving people's lives, we also have to save people's livelihoods, and that's something that we're dedicated to. We will be complying with the governor's executive order number 2020-28 that was issued in a press conference yesterday. We will be implementing it, keeping in mind some of the things that were said by Dr. Bell of DHEC yesterday. And I quote, "Be very cautious, relaxing protective measures. The risk of transmission remains high despite the plateau and hopefully the downward pattern that we're seeing in confirmed cases." And she reminded us all to wear masks, to disinfect items often, and to monitor for symptoms. So as we see some businesses that are allowed to reopen under the governor's executive order as of today, we want to keep those things in mind. Speaking of Mount Pleasant businesses, Mike Carter of the E-Group in Mount Pleasant, one of our high-tech businesses that has just recently invested millions or more dollars into the town of Mount Pleasant, sent me this. It's from the ancient book, The Art of War, and it says, "Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, but tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat." So we are trying to defeat a silent, invisible enemy that is a virus. And the reason we have paid the price to this point is so that others may live. And just because we are able to phase a few things in with proof of concept when we get to the stores and the retail aspect to that, we need to be mindful of the fact that we have to have a strategy for this tactic. And that strategy is still to diminish the risk of the spread of this virus in our community. And we know it's here. We know we have around 100 cases in the town of Mount Pleasant right now. But we also know that the strategy that we applied a week earlier than the state did with the stay-at-home order issued right here, that we have been in this a week longer than the rest of South Carolina. We had that stay-at-home order earlier. We had the senior shopping effort started earlier. We closed town hall and our public facilities earlier. So we hope that we are a week ahead, and we think that is why, and the medical university said in a report they recently issued, in a statement, that the local measures combined with the state measures have helped to flatten that curve. And the numbers look like our curve has been flattened, and that was our strategy going in. So we want to make sure that as we do this now, that we're still working based on a strategy, and that we are not just tactics making the noise before defeat to this virus. We're not flinging the doors open. The stay-at-home order remains in the town of Mount Pleasant. That is consistent with Executive Order number 21, issued previously by the governor. The ban on short-term rentals as part of that remains, and the gathering size limits remain. So just because we can be out and about and do a few more things, again, in a staged process, does not mean that groups can gather, and it does not mean that we're opening the doors to short-term rentals. The people of Mount Pleasant have shown, and the police chief will attest to this in a minute, that the people of Mount Pleasant have been cooperative in this. The businesses have been cooperative. Our police have been working proactively to implement safety measures in the big box stores and the grocery stores. And we know that the public can show caution. So complying with the governor's order to allow this list of other retail stores to open in a limited way is the lifeline to our locally owned businesses who we trust to apply the exact same rules and precautions that we have seen proof of concept with the large-scale stores. We also implore them to take their employees' health concerns into account and make allowances if any of their employees are at higher risk for whatever reason. By being a week ahead of the state in our protective measures, by being a week ahead in senior shopping, a week ahead in closing public facilities, and because of proactive compliance measures that have been demonstrated with a positive effect, we think this phased, careful approach can still save lives while at the same time saving livelihoods. But let's remember, as we have limited retail opening today, the lesson from Folly Beach, when they took down the barriers and the beach was open and social distancing was not observed and it was like a spring break, Folly Beach closed the beach again. So as the governor mentioned yesterday, all of these things can be walked back if we see a spike in confirmed cases or if we see disregard for the public safety. These businesses were already allowed, or most of them, to do curbside fulfillment for pickup. And the only real difference now is that under the executive order, which limits it to 5 customers per 1,000 square feet, or 20% of your legal occupancy, keep that in mind, that all that's happening now that's different is instead of curbside pickup, you can go in under those limited means right there. We have our fire department and our police who are helping pull those numbers to inform these businesses of what their legal occupancy is. It's the lower of 20% of your max or the lower of 5 people per 1,000 square feet. So at this point, I will turn it over to Amanda Knight, who is the town's emergency manager, to go over what our operational objectives have been under this emergency. We've recently added another one as of yesterday that has to do with coming out of all of these protections.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Careful implementation of operational objectives has been and will continue to be foundational to our response and recovery. In doing this, we can measure actions and maintain proactive, forward-leaning posture. Currently, our operational objectives include continuity of critical infrastructure and community lifelines, reducing the risk of exposure to our public workers, reducing the risk of exposure to our community, mitigating the economic impact, and planning for a phased recovery. As we look into a phased recovery process, we will take incremental and intentional steps, continuously evaluating results and adjusting as needed.
Before I bring the chief up, in regards to the, I didn't need it anyway, in regards to one part of the governor's order, where the beaches have been opened, and in yesterday's order, piers and docks are left to the discretion of the local municipalities. At this time, upon advisement of the police chief and our staff, we do not plan to reopen the pier at Waterfront Park, the boardwalk at Shim Creek Park, or Pitt Street Bridge Park, because they are very linear, very confined, and it's hard to comply with the social distancing aspect of the governor's executive order. So as these retail businesses that are listed by the governor are allowed to reopen, there will be a enforcement aspect to that, but the police chief has taught me the difference between public safety and law enforcement. So we're taking this as a public safety opportunity. The police will be on the front lines. They've identified the areas in Mount Pleasant that could become a trouble spot with this, and Chief Carl Ritchie will now tell us what they're going to do to address that, to minimize these risks. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor, and media. I really appreciate y'all being here, and I really appreciate the job you've done during this pandemic to continue to get information out to our citizens. You guys are as vital as we are, no doubt about it. And I appreciate what the mayor said about enforcement. We at Mount Pleasant have really taken a more of a educational, proactive approach in the public safety aspect of it versus enforcement. But my comments are, as we move ever so cautiously to resuming normalcy, whatever normal is going to look like, we as a community must continue what is necessary to protect ourselves, our loved ones, our neighbors, and even those we don't know from the COVID-19 virus. Please note that the governor's order is still in effect regarding social distancing and grouping. I think that is probably now as important as it was then as it is now to continue monitoring that and practicing that so we don't slip back or fall back into getting a spike. I ask you to please continue to limit your outings in time and space necessary, and knowing what you need before you go so you can get in and get out. Guys, if we can practice this, we'll have those days back where we're browsing and window shopping. We want you to still be able to take part in what the governor's open, and we want you to do it responsibly. Our police department has a great relationship with all our stores, big and small. And throughout this pandemic, we have worked together to come up with best practices to keep all safe and healthy. When I say all, I'm talking about the workers in the store, those who are shopping, and our first responders that have been out here since day one. We are currently working with those retail establishments that have had their restrictions lifted to ensure they can do safely and maintain proper customer control. I know we as a community will handle this latest change in a safe and professional manner we have this entire time. We are aware, as most of you are, that not all are doing their part, and the Mount Pleasant Police Department is doing the best we can to remind, encourage, and educate individuals and businesses to do what is right, and we will continue to respond in this manner. We want to work together with our community, with our citizens, and with our businesses, and as a team, we can certainly get through this. Remember, we've been in this together since day one, and we are still in this together. Stay safe and stay healthy, and the Mount Pleasant Police Department remains on the job to protect you.
Thank you, Chief. Part of that, the last strategy that Amanda Knight mentioned is reopening things and restarting our economy. At the state level, you heard the governor mention Accelerate South Carolina and what role they will play. I think it's good, and it's interesting to note that we had 3 Low Country representatives on that 29-member panel, and 2 of them have a presence here in the town of Mount Pleasant. And that's Dr. David Cole of the Medical University of South Carolina. They have a big facility in Mount Pleasant. Dr. Mary Thornley of Trident Tech, they have a facility in Mount Pleasant. And Helen Hill, who runs Discover Charleston, who I serve with on the Aviation Authority Board. So we think the Low Country will be well represented in that. Regionally, the Charleston Regional Development Alliance is going to spearhead a phased reopening of businesses, not only from an economic health standpoint, but from a medical health standpoint. And so as all of these economies open up the state, the regional economy, nobody is throwing caution to the wind. Precautions, best practices, all of these things will be receiving advice from the medical university, and those 2 boards, commissions, task force, whatever you want to call them, will be handling the phased-in approach of that. Locally in Mount Pleasant, we've had from day one the Help Biz Stay Buy Another Way program going so that we can help keep our local businesses in business. If you go to our website, we have a whole resource center for local businesses so that you can know where you can get aid, and there's all sorts of aid through the Paycheck Protection Plan, hopefully, which gets refunded, and the CARES Act and the Small Business Administration, and we're here to help you with those. We're also doing a Zoomcast every Monday afternoon at 3:30. It's me and some town staff with the Mount Pleasant Chamber of Commerce to answer questions and to talk about what we do to get business going. And then finally, before we take your questions, I just want to remind everyone that we have paid many hardships and sacrifices during this so that others may live. And so as we take baby steps forward to try to save livelihoods as well. Let's do not be careless and lose lives in this. And remember, as the governor said, as the state can do and as the town can do, if there's wanton disregard for safety in this, these things can be walked back, but we certainly don't want to have to do that. But out of the hardships and sacrifices have come some wonderful things, like the Feeding Our Heroes group that's based in Mount Pleasant, that, as you know, and many of y'all have covered, they got meals to our frontline workers in this crisis. The police motorcade that our police did to help children who couldn't have a birthday party enjoy their birthday. This is where the spirit of our community has really been shown through this. And then there's other things like online concerts that were led by Mount Pleasant resident and member of the South Carolina Music Hall of Fame, Bobby Howe. He's doing another one Saturday night, and hundreds of people have been watching that. We've done what we had to do to be a community, to take care of our souls, to take care of our bodies. We're trying to take care of our business, but we've got to take care of each other. So I think we're different now, but I think we're better than we were before. So let's work together and be cautious as we take these steps. We'll now take your questions.
I have a question for the chief, please. Chief, how is your department going to enforce this new relaxation by the government, relaxation of this stores to be open again?
Well, I think the same way we've been doing it all along. Again, I don't like using the word enforce. We're partners here in this town. We're partners with our businesses, and we have great community relationships, and we're going to continue to work with them to do education and encouraging them to follow the rules. We've already had meetings or scheduled meetings with the town center as we speak, and they're already proactive looking at ways, because that's probably our largest area that folks will probably group, and they're already working with us as partners. So enforcement will be the last thing that we as an agency want to do, and we've been very good about that through this entire pandemic. We're going to continue that same strategy, working with our partners to find out what best fits for them, our community, and very much.
Chief, has the town actually cited anyone taken any enforcement action during this whole period?
I can tell you we have cited one time, which I think is very good for what we do here. And the one we had to cite, the person knows they deserved it. It actually affected one of our local hospitals where they trespassed at the hospital. It violated the order, and that's when we knew we had to cite. This person knew they deserved it, and they did accept it. Now, we've had many encounters where we've had to speak to our residents, remind them of the rules, and each and every time, for the majority, have been very receptive and pleasant about it. There's always those few, but you know what? That's what we do as law enforcement and as public safety folks. We deal with that on a daily basis. We know how to deal with that, and we've had good response so far.
For the local businesses that can now reopen, one, whose responsibility is it to kind of control the customers in that business? And secondly, what role will the department play in controlling that?
I appreciate that. I think bottom line is the store's responsibility, quite frankly. You have the executive orders that have come out and the restrictions that have been lifted through the governor's office, and then, as the mayor said, through our proclamations. There's got to be some ownership and responsibility by the stores, first and foremost, and we're going to assist them with that. Make sure they understand what the guidelines are. Make sure they understand what the numbers should be, look like in their store. It's also responsibility of our citizens. I think that falls squarely in their shoulders, like this whole pandemic's our response has been. It's their responsibility to do what's right for themselves, their family, and all those around them. So we're all in this together. This isn't about one person. And then at the end of the day, we as public safety and law enforcement, we have that option. And that is not one that I expect us to have to use or believe we're going to have to deal with. We have a great relationship with all of our businesses and our citizens, and we've been doing quite well with it.
I have one for the mayor.
Yes, sir.
Sir, this afternoon there's a meeting of the Recreation Committee to discuss reopening the town's parks. You've just announced that they're not reopening. What's the connection, or what's the point of the meeting a couple hours from now?
What I was addressing was the piers, because the governor's executive order specifically lifted the executive order prohibition on piers or docks being open. And since we have at least 3 of those, and after consulting with the police chief, he did not advise from an enforcement standpoint that we lift it from those 3. Councilman Santos is here. His group is looking at everything as how we can phase them in, when, where, how, what safety precautions. And so they'll be doing, what's that, 2 o'clock here? They'll be meeting at 2 o'clock. and they'll be coming up with some recommendations that we hope we can implement.
Thanks.
Have you had any conversations, or how much of a dialogue is there between you and the other mayors on kind of the barrier islands, the beach islands, about keeping those beaches closed and kind of going against the governor on that?
There has been a lot of dialogue among everybody. Matter of fact, yesterday we had a teleconference with Chairman Summy, Mayor Tecklenburg, and me. Our emergency managers were on the phone as well as we talked about implementing these things. I know that the island communities have been in contact with each other. They've been in touch with me. One of the things that I really appreciate that especially the Isle of Palms did, because I know Sullivan's doesn't allow them, but the Isle of Palms, when we raised a little protest a month ago, whatever, when they first shut down, was they did restrict short-term rentals, which is good, because the thought of short-term rental people getting on their island and then coming into Mount Pleasant, the Mount Pleasant people couldn't, that we couldn't live with. But now I think they're looking at the same thing everybody else is. It's a phased-in approach. They're doing what's best to meet their strategic objectives, like you heard Amanda mention ours, and they have to limit the exposure of their officers and their personnel as well. And if they get inundated by tens of thousands of people, that's going to be real hard to do. So I feel for them. I think they're looking at a phased-in approach, much like we are. And we've all agreed that everything as we progress out of this needs to be as closely timed and coordinated as possible. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Mayor, do you feel like these things are being coordinated, or do you feel like the state is preempting your local decisions on what should open and when?
Well, the state has tried to work with us, and I have been honest from the start. I'm glad Mount Pleasant was a week ahead of the state on this. I think if I had a vote, I would have said that asked the state to do this a week later than they did, but they did it. But the good part for Mount Pleasant, and the reason we're moving forward with caution but not with fear, is that we have seen these measures work in our big box stores. The police chief can attest to that. We've been there, we've seen it. So if we can make sure that that same concept and those same precautions are applied here, I think it will work with the smaller stores. But again, I'll go back to something I said, and it's been a while in this press conference now. We're not flinging the doors open. It's not spring break. And it's not time to flock and browse and shop. It's like the chief said, know what you're getting, go and get it, and leave. I have real concerns with clothing stores of people trying on clothes and putting them back on the rack. I don't think that's something you ought to do. I think you ought to know what you're getting and get it and leave.
Mayor, have you gotten any response from restaurant owners? Are they able to sustain with the drive-through? Have they pushed you at all to kind of open up restaurants at all, or has there not been any
None
dialogue?
of them have pushed me at all, and I've been, my wife and I have been good to try to patronize them as much as we can. And what I get from all of them is we're hanging in there. They're staying. They're doing enough through carry out to keep some essential personnel. And as soon as they can, and as soon as the restrictions are lifted, I'm sure they'll bring hopefully everybody back. We've lost close to 30,000 hospitality jobs in this region in the last month. That is more than the jobs that were lost when the naval base shut down in the 1990s. So that's a huge impact. The good thing is the naval base went away. These jobs will come back, and they will. It's just a matter of when. Anything else? All right, well, thank y'all very much, Chief, Amanda. Thank y'all, Councilman Santos. Thank you for coming. And we will update you maybe towards the end of the week, and we'll see what comes out of the Recreation Committee today. Thank you.